Yo te de, yo te de. Ay, oh, ay, oh, yo te de. Yo te de, yo te de. Ay, oh, yo te de. Yo te de, yo te de. Ay, oh, yo te de. Yo te de, yo te de. Ay, oh, yo te de. Hello. Hello, my friends. Gosh, I love the way that rings. Into the new moon, so if the bones are hollow, let it ring. Let it sing. It is a new moon. Ulilisti Atsenta. A dark moon. A moon occulted by the sun. And with that, also many lessons. Also many, many lessons. Mercury is still in retrograde. Jupiter has left its retrograde, which has very much advanced the momentum of things, or the tension of things, with the ways in which they actually spin. It feels very much like pulling that tension along further points along its axis, which is very important because there is another axis at play with Jupiter and Pluto, and the ways in which Jupiter paints or sees this bigger picture, and the way Pluto and its advancements are perhaps changing the ways in which we seek, and also the ways in which we see. In general, absolutely in general, but with the new moon in Pisces, with Mars, Mercury, and the Sun all together, all hanging out, all very much intensely uncomfortable, I think. Pisces is not just the depths of water. It's very much an inclusion of other chemistries as well, which there is a whole video that kind of extends on that beyond Western astrology. But in a very literal sense, we have that compounded with just the opposite of elements that it is in. The heat and the integrity of Mars, the far reaching of Mars, perhaps swimming too deeply and not taking its time, or feeling less than in some way, shape, or form. These fiery planets and their insecurities with water energies is something to be recognized, something to account for. It is very much, I feel like, a boiling point in so many ways, especially when we're not fully aware of the chemistry or chemicals that are so involved. This retroactive impulse that is caused by these Mars understandings, perhaps not listening to Mercury, even though Mercury in its retrograde is very much there to assist in the ways in which we communicate with ourselves, with our story, and also with the external world in some way, shape, or form, in any way, shape, or form. Speaking of Mercury, its own axis entirely with Venus and Ceres. And not just that, Ceres' relationship to Eris, and Eris conjunct with Chiron is its a whole other thing. But step by step, other axis cutting across these axes is very much that conversation with the more sensitive parts of emotional energies, of the root cause of those things, of the very root of where those things come from, because it is just not this impulse or this instance. It is very much rooted in something else entirely. Oftentimes, we're not necessarily sure exactly where that comes from, and this is why talk therapy only goes so far without some sort of somatic, like, reality trigger. Even within dreaming, you implant these. So why would we not see these things in waking reality? And so Mercury and Venus in Ceres very much are assisting us in potentially paving the way to be able to see through the muck, see through the fog, to be able to clear a path amongst it with a clearer sight, with a clearer energy, with a clearer signal despite the static. And this does fork off into uh, totally both separate and also together energies, like they influence the other, but it's kind of like a chicken and an egg circumstance, because that energy will delta out into the collective unconscious and the collective consciousness. um, but the opposite path would be the unconscious, the self unconscious even. It reminds me of something that I had heard recently, where somebody said, how do I deal with people unconsciously taking my energy? And my response to that is, how ironic, because if you're unconsciously losing energy, then the consciousness needs to be applied to you and how well you maintain your energy. And this Mercury Venus Ceres relationship is very much the ways in which we, approach connection, compassion, love, the ways in which we feel that within ourselves or understand that in ourselves, and the ways in which we are able to offer that to ourselves in any way, shape, or form. Like how you nurture yourself is often very reflective of the ways in which you want to be nurtured and the ways in which you have been nurtured before. And so, maybe two seeds to that plant, right? There's a root and a mycelium helping to transport that information. And oftentimes, the ways in which we move through these energies is very unconscious and is very unaware of how deeply ingrained it is to maybe the things that we don't want. Like what bad habits have you taken on from your parents? And not just that, but like what it can go far beyond that. It can go to deep betrayals that perhaps you feel more compounded in this lifetime because of them in a past lifetime. And I do think very deep roots of the ways in which our lineages were bought, sold, traded, bred, and collectively, what do we really understand about how we feel that in our body? That may not be something that we have personally experienced, but it is something that I think is lingering in the collective unconscious. Um, Lingering in the collective consciousness, but like we're trying to keep our heads down about it. Um, Gosh, in so many ways, shapes, and forms, right? That we ought not, that we ought to truly learn to relate to, and just how deeply this is ingrained. And I think in so many ways we fail to recognize that. Like a lot of posts that you see that are like, "You're not angry enough," that do not offer like pillars of thought beyond that, are really just posts of self righteousness. They're doing the same thing like Jehovah's Witnesses do. And I've seen posts where people sell merch with clever slogans about, you know, killing all this or eating the rich or killing all pedophiles, and like party on. But the people that are doing it aren't posting about it on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram. Um, you know, the people that are saying it aren't really the ones that are about doing it. And ultimately, I think to sell based on the emotional stimulation at play is a really unintegral thing to do. And that's in fact the kind of exploitation that got us here in the first place. And so, in what ways do we peel back even those layers of consciousness so that we can see the truth and value for all that we do or project or inspire or ignite or imagine, really, even within ourselves? Our personal unconscious feeds the collective consciousness. And so when we find ourselves, wrought with self righteousness and sort of exploiting emotion uh, for our own gain or our own benefit, then we find ourselves in line with the very thing that we try to topple. And, no wonder things get frustrating. Then we have a misalignment, a lack of cohesion in the medium and the meaning, whatever that may be, in the ways in which we aim and the ways in which we move. And that very much is its own axis entirely involved in this. I think Jupiter and Pluto create a new, like, weighted point, or create a new momentum in turning along any still point that begs for new eyes, like new eyes to lead, new leading points of consciousness, new possibilities and understanding. Let's not write off possibility because somebody hasn't written you a doctor's note for it, because somebody hasn't written and published a dissertation about it. Too often, I think we lean into credibility that also placates us into the same system and farther away from our own credibility. And so this is also, yes, an incredible story, but a story that requires you to know whether or not you trust this narrator, and the narrator is you. And I think a lot of mental health industry would benefit from you not trusting your own mind, not trusting your own body, even when it feels unbelievable. But you do not benefit from not trusting you. Your story does not benefit from not trusting you. Pisces being water, yes, but also a northern direction of air is how these things pull momentum forward, and often in an unseen but deeply felt kind of way, which is why there's so much combativeness with, collective emotion, impulse, sensation, and the ways in which we allow that to drive us or cause us to thrive, because you can be the driver, so to speak. Hello, hi, welcome, thank you for being here, appreciate you. Chiron and Eris conjunct is very much, how are we treating our wounds? How are we treating the wounds that we are aware of? And how are we taking care of not just the wounds that we know we have, but like actual preventative care, for shit that's going on, which is like, not just necessarily frontline protests. It is very much other systems of, and it is also not just, I had a panic attack, now I need to start breath work. It is the ways in which you build ritual, maybe not just habit, but ritual around it, so that you can maintain a clear mind even when all things are wild. Um, and like I said, that goes far beyond just this life and this lifetime. And your dreams, I think, very much show you other aspects of that in some way, shape, or form. Um, that's not to say take everything literally, but that is to say observe. Observe and without judgment. And perhaps that is also what Jupiter and Pluto are asking, is with that kind of observation, new solutions arise. And we do not pull too far back on where it is we think we are going without any real idea. Without any real idea. There's new values and new value systems all around us. And I mean that in so many ways, shapes, and forms. Like, yes, that's what's come through. But also, like, there's so much talk about new currency systems. There's so much change and fluctuation in what we recognize as currency systems and how they even came to be. There's so many new platforms that allow you to invest in more creative value systems. Perhaps, new types of investments, whether or not that is trivializing gambling addiction, most likely. Whether or not that is, playing into the obsession and the distraction that surrounds us in capitalism, likely. But when you can see these things for what they are, all the easier to be able to deal with. And that's not to say easy, nothing's easy. Sometimes it's simple, but it's not always easy. But to bring ease It's not necessarily about it being easy, but it is about your capacity to breathe through it. Breathe through the stress, breathe through the frustration, breathe through the annoyance, so that you can move in a way that is integral with where it is you want to be, rather than thrown off centered by everything and everyone else. And to continue to move toward a system that is not complicit or in line with the kind of exploitation that we see ourselves surrounded by. Saturn and Neptune have finally moved into Aries, and they finally find a little distance too from their major conjunctions. And with that, I do think there's a very literal distance between our thought and our body, a very literal distance between, you know, our aims and our presence, our goals and our presence and our past, even. The memory can create more and more distance in between those things, which is perhaps why nostalgia is such a wonderful thing that can bring you present with the right lick, with the right spin on it. Careful not to be reeled into mourning what could have been or what was, because all those are ever reminders of is how you can make more. Don't mourn the past, dream of the future, and how you can bridge those gaps. It may be small lessons, and like I said, small things in your dreams, even maybe not the whole dream, but certain aspects of it. That perhaps, connecting those dots does not have as much distance as is being pulled in the planets, or as much as is pulled in the mind, or in our unconscious lack of awareness of, and is an opportunity to find synthesis, synchronicity, to find momentum toward that thing. And like I've said before, just because Saturn and Neptune are in Aries does not mean that they are not asking us to remember what it carried over from Pisces, especially because they did a little dance for a hot minute. And because that information is going to be a salve on the wounds to Chiron and anything that is conjunct with Chiron, like Eris right now. And I'm sure eventually, when Saturn and Neptune get closer and closer into all of the, bad memories that Chiron can have, but also its capacity to make better memories when we are able to recognize those things. The shadows in the stories can tell you so much about what is real, yes, and also what is imaginal, absolutely. Those two things don't have to be so separate. They can influence the other. Just like thought or perception influences a particle and its movement or motion. Gosh, so much going on. It is very exciting. It is very intense though, and I do think that delta in axis is very much like a crossroads for a lot of people, and it is maybe less about the decision and more about the intentionality in presence, the intentionality in being there. Like when you feel lost at any given crossroads, do you leave it up to chance? Do you take a wild guess? Do you say fuck it and pick one? Or do you slow for a moment and do you ask your body, do you ask your heart what it's saying to you? Do you ask the earth what it's saying to you? Do you listen to the wind and wonder where it'll carry you? As silly as that might sound to some people, I can say for a fact that when I have been lost in the woods, rather than choose an anxiety, I sat and I said, you know what? Something will tell me the right way to go. And sure enough, sat for a minute and eventually just felt called to a direction. Something about it. And sure enough, ran into my friends. So, happy story. And not just my story, but I have been told similar stories from other people that I have had the pleasure of breathing with. So, with all of that being said, Now is as good as any to try something new. Not in the sense of like, oh, I gotta take on another thing, but in the sense of like how we have to adjust our learning styles or adjust our teaching styles for different learning styles. How would you teach yourself something new in a new way? You know what? And if there's something that you're trying to do or trying to learn that doesn't seem like it's working, doesn't mean you have to change the goal. Perhaps you have to change the way in which you're learning or receiving information. Maybe you're not as much of an audio learner or a visual learner or what have you, and you've got to do more with your hands. Tactile learner. Perhaps. And maybe that means just trying in general instead of giving yourself all of these detours of but first. Trust me, I get that. I've got processes for sure. When you turn them into an experience, then you'd be surprised what doors can open up. So how are you nurturing yourself? How are you building compassion toward yourself and within yourself so that you can continue to do that which is needed, so that you can do that which you intend to honor, so that you can uphold responsibility to the things that you value? Nurturing isn't always like, shutting down or powering off. Sometimes it's more of a, I think in general, it's more of a, how do I tap into a renewable resource within me? How do I regenerate? And sometimes it's just laughter. Sometimes it's just a funny thing. Sometimes it's a little nostalgia. Sometimes it's trying the other way around, the other way in, trying something opposite or antithetical. So as to give you a better dimensional perspective. All right. With all of that said, we will pull some cards. We'll do a little breath to integrate after. For the many of you that perhaps are new from one platform or another, some things that you might notice that are a little different is, yes, I do read tarot. However, I also read in cartomancy, which is playing cards in the ways in which I read with it. While tarot has been around for a long time, playing cards have been around just as long. And of the lore of tarot and the game for the elites, let's be real, it is never a game for them, is it? And I think that cartomancy was very much an ancestral way to be able to maintain that relationship with the storyline or with the spirit of it covertly and regardless of the hierarchy. And so, never underestimate a little playing card game. The other thing that you might notice is I also take this as an opportunity for us to breathe together, all better to tap in, eh? For you, that just means that I would like you to take the fullest breath that you can. And I hope that you are aware of any sensations that arise. You do not have to tap into anything. Although if you want to, tap into the moon, tap into the stars. It is also a part of you. Do not fear. All right, loves. much like we are hanging out, much like we have cards between us, because we do, we are going to take 3 deep breaths together. And like I said, just make your body available to the fullest breath and just notice any sensations that arise. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Okay, this is interesting. In the ways Pisces chemically translates into indigenous astrology, it is, yes, water, but it is also air. And there's definitely like elements of heat in it as well. And so what I'm seeing is very much like a water scene. But there's like something in the distance and also something in the way that is not entirely clear. And what we think is like an impediment or an obstacle or interference, a pillar in our way is often just a reflection, of you, of your relationship to it in some way, shape, or form. And then the ways in which you react to that relationship in some way, shape, or form. And so this obstacle, this pillar, is not an obstacle if you can see your reflection in it. And that is also very imaginable. Imaginal in the ways in which, like, perhaps it's a reaction or a relationship that has been, that can be reimagined, that needs to be reimagined, that needs to be restored, retold, um, or perhaps even remembered, altogether remembered. That powerlessness that we feel is an implant of the system, is an implant of exactly what colonialism, patriarchy, and religious dogma would prefer. And I think very much so, this like perpetual, it's not me, it's you, is a hell of a challenge, is also always an opportunity for you to reflect. And that's not to say, blame yourself. It's not always me and never you, but it is always a learning opportunity. It is always an opportunity to expand your perspective. And perhaps that means perspective shifts so entirely that you find yourself on the opposite end, or that you find yourself in uncharted territory and understanding, which is a good thing, because you know what? The charted territory that we've got to work with ain't quite fucking charted now, is it? So perhaps unexplored waters, if that's not a fucking Pisces thing, I don't know what is, because it's very much like the depths of depths of depths. And that is somewhere we ought not be afraid to go. But that is also dependent and integral on the capacity for breath that you have, like the familiarity for your breath that you have, whether or not you're even aware of your release and everything that comes with it, or your inhales and everything that can come with it. Because the deeper we go, the more important your breath is. And that's a reoccurring thing. That's a living thing. That's a thriving thing. It's not just a one and done. It's not just a pill and be gone. It's not just, one course, one class, and it's forever over. No, the right ones will give you a set of tools to be able to use and use and use and use, no matter what. With the idea of like, if I just do this one thing and then all of this will be okay, is capitalism. That's capitalism, selling false ideas. Quite honestly, even in regards to everything going on, I've heard so many people say, like, let's just kill him, let's just kill him. If somebody were to, I mean, somebody already took out Epstein. Has that changed anything? No. And quite honestly, if somebody took out fucking shithead in office, next in line is just as much of a motherfucker. So obviously, that's not the easy way out or the solution. There's something else at play. There's something else that can be done, and it starts at healing the root rather than just picking off the surface. And that's best understood within the self before you start to see it actualize outside of the self. You want to change the world, start with you. Some interesting messages in here. Ooh, okay. All right. All right. Hello, how are you? Eight of Hearts, inverted, bottom of the deck. This very much goes back to this trusting of the self, trusting the narrator, trusting things around us. And generally, like, we can all gather that, people go on the internet, they don't trust what they read, they don't trust what they see. Could be AI, da 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 da. However, it's so funny because a lot of people really up in arms about that are so keyed in on not trusting what's around them that they've forgotten how to trust themselves. And that makes it that much harder to be able to differentiate or discern. The art of discernment is particularly important right now. And that is not just the process of assumption or the science of association. It is always deeper than that, which I'm sure is what propels these consciousness studies forward. I'm sure will continue to propel these understandings of, like, what is not, what is real, what is not, what is alive, what is not, what is love, what is not, what is just the beast that looks like it. And so there's this oscillating that reoccurs. Eights can very much dominate the mind in so many ways, especially with the systems that have applied them. It is very much about mind control. It is very much about consciousness control. And so much of us are unnerved by its capability for prediction that we are disturbed in what it is capable of knowing. And yet we fail to recognize just how capable of knowing we are and just how capable of change we are. But comfort is not found in change. It can be, but it is not where we go to look for it, no. This back and forth with this Eight of Hearts is so blind and cyclical, and it's very much caught in a binary world, caught in a two-dimensional world, caught in this or that, caught in the intensity of either side, especially I think with Pisces energy. It's like being fully dry or totally wet, being beached on shore or in too deep. So how do we find balance in between? We have to find that meeting point, that still point, and that is, even in the eight, even in the way that the eight is, that crisscross point, that is a crossroads. Is that a crossroads that we fear? Is that a crossroads that we get lost in, that causes us to cycle again? Or is that a crossroads that leads to something slightly unlike itself, like propagation of sorts? And in that is very much like, okay, we have all of this energy, we have all of this heat, this anger, this rage, this intensity, this inspiration, perhaps. How do we direct it? How do we move with it? Instead of finding numbness and relief, how do we give relief? Or release in general? Because numbness is not akin to relief as much as we might think. And release is, I think, particularly integrally different than relief. It can lead to relief, but relief also requires release in order to be true and deep and somatic and integral in any way, shape, or form. So there's a lot of shit that we're holding on to and wondering why it's following us, but we have yet to set it free. We have yet to release it. Whether that be something that's not ours at all and we blow it into the wind like a dandelion, or whether that be something that's a deep inherent part of us that we have been ignoring, that we have been dishonoring, disrespecting, even in that ignorance and in that silence, that must be integrated, that needs to find its place in you so that it is not at odds, not kicking, not screaming, not left behind. Like these parts of you are like mama duck and baby ducks in line. And I think there are some parts of us that we, hope fell off, or that we cut off on the path, or that we tried to get lost or tried to lose in taking a new path. But oh, it's still there. It's still there, walking up behind you. And I don't mean that to sound scary. I think those are the things that we ought to lean into, that we ought to face and spend time with. Fearlessness has been a reoccurring theme. And there's a lot of fear in the atmosphere. And I don't think, again, that we have to operate on this aspect of consumed by fear or fearlessness as in never had it. Who is it? Quite honestly, I think that can be quite an irresponsible way to live, That's when you cross the street without looking either way and cause wrecks on either side of you. I think we have a responsibility to face fear fearlessly, in which case they're no longer 2 points, they are simply one. And if you face fear fearlessly, then you are reminded of its responsibility. If there is virtuousness in fearlessness, it is only in facing fear, and it is only in tandem with responsibility, because that responsibility will be reflected toward you. I have a responsibility to face this fear because I know I can do it, not because you have anything to prove. And also, I have a responsibility to face this fear because it will remind witnesses to face their fears. Because in facing this fear, I reveal it for many of us, for all of us, for the collective consciousness. And this is where your unconscious behaviors and your unconscious thoughts begin to affect so much more than just you. And I think a lot of us can say that we know that too. If you ever love somebody who's got a hell of a habit, it affects a lot more than just them. And though we may not see ourselves in a similar light, there is no comparison, really. We're all addicted to something, be it our phones or likes or checking for interaction or sweets or pizza or convenience or attention. Is that any different than an addiction to any other substance? The design of these technologies was very much to aim for the same root. And it's all coming to a head. It's all coming to a very high boiling point. And I think we will be that much clearer in seeing solution, or clearer in moving in a solution-oriented way, when we dispel hierarchies or distance between connection in any way, shape, or form, and are able to see ourselves and others on equal plane. I feel like it's like dumping your bag out too. Like, if you remember when people were doing that, like everyday carry posts, and it was like, purses dumped out just as well as like dudes in their pockets and whatever. I feel like it's kind of like that, but energetically and emotionally. If you were to empty all of your pockets and all of your burdens and put them on even plane, what are you holding on to? What do you actually need? And why? Not just because of the thing and what it gives you, but because of the relationship associated with it. Sometimes we've got fucking scraps of paper and wrappers at the bottom of our pockets and our bags, loose change, you know what I mean? Why? What is our relationship to the debris? And what is our relationship to the token? You know, the occasional rock in your pocket. What is the relationship to it? And we can look at our bones and our burdens in the same way. Reveal. What is your relationship to it? Is it even yours? Or is it time to set it free? And if it is yours, you can set it free by finding a place in it for you and for it. I've got some stories and experiences of my own for sure, with emotions that I thought were at odds with me, and in fact, they were just looking to be heard. They were just looking to teach something. And again, it can't always be a learning opportunity. But honing in on that discernment to know the difference between is important, or you will forever be caught in the cyclical state in between. 5 of clubs, 4 of spades, 10 of hearts. 5 of clubs is very much that churning of energy, that churning. And if we do not adjust, if we do not pivot, if we do not open our eyes, we continue to chase our tails over and over and over again, never leaving the cycle. It's a dance of foxes, a dance of blind illusion, a dance of seeming progress, but toward a mirage. And for what? Fear of accountability, fear of adjustment, that keeps us chasing our tails, keeps us walking in line even though we feel like we're slightly out of sync. Inverted makes me think new systems inside. Like, not just new systems outside, but we also can't, like, pomp and circumstance those systems and also expect them to fall. But we also can't maintain the same default systems, the same, like, default user interface within and expect what's on the screen in front of us to change. That's very much what this 5 of clubs is. The 4 of spades calls us back home. The 4 of spades calls us back internally to the central point, to understand where it is we find our hearts, to understand how it is we even see, feel, or interpret love, let alone change. But that's a key point to finding grounding, to know where that change may even take you, or where you want that change to take you, really. And when we get clear on that, when you know who you are, this 10 of hearts is upright. This 10 of hearts is entirely upright. And that is an incredible amount of success, of fulfillment, of wholeness, of recognition, of reflection, even. It is not just a malleable creative void, and it is not just the projection. It is the unification of these two things. But there's some questions that we have to answer first. Let's ask some of these questions, shall we? Or see what Spirit has to say about them. It sounded like an echo. So I wonder what you'll say. All right, my friends, on to the tarot. And much like we have cards between us, because we do, and much like we are hanging out, because we are, let's channel some shit and put it on this data highway. Okay? Just open your body to the fullest breath that you can find and open your awareness to any sensations that may arrive. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Interesting. So many questions of relationships too. But even that has its root questions. So many questions of relationships too, where it's like we find ourselves drawn to things, not for the thing itself, but for something that it fulfills, for something that it speaks to. And that can be a thing, that can be a person, that can be a place, that can be many things. You know, we're drawn to a particular type of person because it reminds us of our childhood trauma, and we find comfort in that. Or we find ourselves drawn to particular settings because it numbs our body enough to be able to tolerate our mind. Or we find ourselves drawn to particular cravings. And it's never just about the craving of the thing, it is rooted in some other need for fulfillment or some other need for not even stimulus, but like sensation or cessation of sensation. But there are ways to mitigate that in general, like even just doing like a mantra japa yesterday, doing a particular mantra for 108 times. For as much as I always say that meditation isn't about like stopping your mind, it is about befriending your mind, like not observing or not judging, but observing your mind. In mantra, you kind of lose all of that. Like the mind is just so present, and the senses are just so present that for sure it's like maybe the closest I've ever gotten to it feeling like the mind is just empty. It's aware. It's very aware, it's very active, but it's just not full of clutter. So much so that you can almost like forget what's happening, forget what you were doing, forget what's going on. And there's a point in breath very similar where you're not aware of the inhale, you're not aware of the exhale, you're not aware of the holding of it or where it's held per se. Like it just kind of all blurs together. And I've experienced that many times in various different breath works, particularly ones that involve holding, which isn't necessarily recommended for everybody, especially if you are pregnant. But in that hold, there's sometimes moments where I'm like, oh shit, how long has it been? Am I okay? Wait, am I holding on an exhale or am I holding on an inhale? I forgot. And it doesn't even feel like holding. It just feels like there's breath everywhere. It's the strangest feeling. I don't necessarily know if I have really tried to articulate that to anybody before. Um, Sometimes at first it's kind of shocking and it's like, oh, I don't know how long it's been and where I'm at. And after that shock, it's just kind of like, oh wow, this is really nice. This is really peaceful. this is really calming. There's not a sense of panic in sight. And that can be really hard for people with breath work in general, as I think, even regardless of holds, is there's an element of panic that already is incited. There's an element of like particular awareness and overwhelm with sensation that I think occurs for most people when they get involved in something like that. But I think the more that you find ways for it to fit you, because a lot of popular breath work or popularized breath work is like very much vigorous and very much, visceral, or is very much geared toward bursting open your third eye and ripping up your kundalini and like forcing you into this state of awareness or enlightenment, when you can also just like bask in it and let it wash over you instead of being geared toward whatever's next. And that's something that anxiety and the ways in which our body holds onto that, or our mind perceives that and sort of wraps around it, or finds that more familiar, can impact the ways in which we breathe. And on a day-to-day basis, your levels of anxiety change, and your relationship with your breath ought to reflect that. It does reflect that. Also, it ought to be given more awareness so that it reflects that appropriately, and so that we do not feel like we're at the mercy of these things, because they are just creative inspirations. Our physical body ought not be at mercy of things that we can very much work with and that need to be in relay to us, that want to be in relay to us. And so they speak back to us as directly as we speak back to them. The body, I mean. And I think that's where so much tension and pain and chronic illness also comes into play. Is there's things in ourselves that we've avoided that the body still wants us to know, that it still remembers, and it wants us to remember as well. Shit, I think that's why so many digestive organs have been ripped out of us. Go figure. Go figure. Eight of Cups, bottom of the deck. Interesting. Considering the Eight of Hearts at the bottom of the last deck. In which case, what a beautiful image for that kind of anxiety and overwhelm. The nervous system. Like, all of this hair, it's like your nervous system wrapped around this thing, holding onto this thing, this thought, this ideology, this sense of self, what we think is self. But honestly, a lot of us have a very literal understanding of that. What if we were to give ourselves something more substantial to hold, rather than just what we think our roles are in this colonial society, what we think our value is in this capitalist society, and we're able to more closely hold onto our integrity, onto our energy, onto our awareness, onto whether or not we even trust ourselves. Like, hold yourself like you know yourself, not at a distance. And also the awareness of everything that we take in. This is very like hyper aware, like overstimulated, too much sensation kind of feeling. There's even kind of, I think, this like element of hoarding energy in that too. And sometimes we hoard our trauma, sometimes we hoard our pain, sometimes we hoard our knowledge, sometimes we hoard what it is we think we are, because we don't want somebody to attack it again. And I get that. Oh, trust me, I do. However, that which is you, that which is always you, that which is whole you, isn't running away. It's not something that can go missing. It is something that you always have, but it is something that we forget. And so even in that, this overwhelm is like man-made. It's like a product of creation. It is not natural. It is not, just because. And what gets overshadowed by all of the distractions in front of us is the energy, that heartfelt energy, that deep rooted green that really is our spark, our motivation, our will to do or move with anything. I do think that green also comes up a lot for people in cases of envy, or comparison, rather than compersion. But comparison of, me, myself now, and who I was before, me, myself now, and who I want to be, or who people expect me to be, me, myself now, and what my parents expect me to be, or me, myself now, and jobs I've had before, or whatever it is. That level of comparison takes us out of the present. It takes us out of being able to see the whole picture because we're too busy worried about, again, the glitter, the mirage, the distractions that are in front of us that we fail to remember what we feel and everything else that we're taking in. Of the senses that create our reality, your sight and your tangible touch are but few of the senses that really take in everything and create the experience that we have. Very literally, and I say this a lot, because it always comes up, but very literally, the nerves in your eyes also route directly from the brain to the eye, from the back forward. So we are not just taking in light and taking in stimulus from the outside in. We are very much creating it in the brain and in the mind side. And that's just one way in which one sense becomes two sense, becomes not just what you see to believe, and not just what you feel either. Stimulus is very different than just feeling and emotion. And I think too often we lean too wholly into all of the hyperstimulus and fail to recognize where it comes from, what it's doing in the body, what the body's trying to say with it, how the mind's even interpreting it. And this is something that, in a very literal and a very physical and visceral way, is a fundamental misunderstanding in how we understand love. Because people, the more I ask people that question too, is like, why do you love this person? Or what do you think love is? The more disappointing the answers are. Because it's always something so literal, so physical, like, oh, I feel it in my genitals, or I feel it in my heart. And it's like, do you? Or is that just a physical sensation that you're confusing with love because your body has an impulse for lust? Or is that only in your heart because you were told it was in your heart and that that's the organ of love? When we don't even have a clear understanding about how the heart actually functions. It is very much like this weird little muscle wrap vortex with lobes. It's strange. Likewise, the lungs. But in that, even butterflies or what have you, sometimes that's more of a sign of anxiety. Sometimes it's more of a chaos than it is like oh, this is good for me. So the ways in which the body responds, or the ways in which the body speaks, and the ways in which we respond to it are incredibly important. Why, thank you so much. I appreciate you for that comment, and I appreciate your presence and being here with us for these calculations, for these unearthings, these stripping backs of illusions, these peeling backs of layers. While I may relate mostly to indigenous astrology or philosophies, Vedic sciences are maybe the most documented, which is why the Decolonize Your Mind or Banish the Patriarchy courses very much deal with the medicine wheel as well as the Kosha or the Klesha. And in the Kosha, it is very much like you are an onion and you're peeling back layers of illusion of what you think you are, of what you think, your body is, of what you think your mind is capable of what you think your emotions are telling you, to get to the very root of it and what you are and all that you are not. We are not just our body. Our body is much more than matter. We are much more than just our mind. The mind is just a part of it. We are much more than just our feeling or our sensation or our stimulus. We are quantum computers of input of data, and the ways in which we are able to discern or differentiate between it is also so much more than just in the analytical or intellectual brain. And intellectual is a reach. Intelligence is different than intellect, and intellect is very different than your intuition. And there's still a process of assumption in between what we think intellect and intuition is. Most people are just intelligent, but they have not figured out how to bridge that with a synthesizing intellect. This is why they had us, this is essentially how they had us writing papers and shit in school. It's like, okay, you've got these points, but your conclusion needs to be of your own devising of some pattern that you see within these points. That is the difference between intelligence and intellect. Your intelligence is being able to identify those 3 points, find that information, right? Your intellect is that conclusive synthesis, that new idea with connecting these dots and perhaps even bridging new information. Your intuition is beyond that, where yes, we see patterns, yes, we recognize these things, but there's also a deep sense of feeling involved. And not just emotional, like, but this makes me happy and this makes me sad. Like a deep, somatic, physiological response to it, where it's almost autonomic, which is why breath is so important. And sometimes that's the bridge in that gap of assumption and intuition. In simply taking a breath. Especially when it comes to impulse, especially when it comes to issues of anger, annoyance, or judgment. Let us not put ourselves in the same righteous place of the same people that have traumatized us with their religious dogma thus far. Too often do we find ourselves in these spaces seeking the same kind of glory. And perhaps that's exactly why we feel ourselves still longing, still unfulfilled. Because we're seeking a glow of glory that we have yet to be able to ignite inside, or to witness or recognize inside. And that is the beginning step. Recognizing it within, recognizing it inside. And so this, my dear, is my reminder that let's not let humbleness turn insecurity, and let's not let ego turn into, or confidence turn into ego, but let's let that find a new axis into integrity and discernment. You see what I mean there? Like, humbleness can turn into insecurity, and confidence can turn into ego. But on this new axis, we root down, we bridge the gaps from mind to body, we root in a new axis, and with that comes discernment and integrity. With that comes stillness and strength. With that, nobody can force your nose to the ground. Nobody. The Queen of Cups is all of that. The Queen of Cups is very much all of that. The Queen of Cups holds this Ten of Hearts like a champion. That is, in fact, the beacon that she holds, and this rose of pure light, this rose of pure frequency. And that's not pure like in puritanical fucking purity politics, but that is pure like no noise, no static. Like there is no illusion to it. This is disillusioned and raw, which is funny because the purity politics would hate me saying raw. If you notice her hat, it is a sliver of a moon. A sliver of a moon. So not necessarily a dark moon, but with the lack of wholeness in the moon, it's not because the moon's not there. that is because of our perspective. So kind of similar thing applies. It's not because you are not whole, it is because you are not looking. And the geometry that stems off of this is like often I think the hologram, like the fractal rays that happen upon it or that happen from it, the ways in which things glow off in the distance and the frequency or radiation that they carry. That is why we see stars brighter or dimmer in the sky or certain colors or what have you, is because of its like chemical makeup and frequency and the distance of light. So it looks brighter, or it looks dimmer, or it looks more red, or da 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 da. And so perhaps this is also a moment where we're peering too deeply and we're, forcing ourselves to read into the night. We're crossing our eyes, right? When you relax your eyes, you're able to see new connections. When you relax your mind's eye, you're able to see new shapes, frames, paradigms. This is also very literally like a way in which to train the eye to see auras, or to see, movement even in two-dimensional illusions, like very MC Escher kind of stuff. The ways in which we can find depth in a two-dimensional picture. Oh, I thank you. Oh, I'm loving your feedback. I'm loving how much you're getting from this too. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. What was I saying? Geometry of light, reflections, refractions, prisms, which is very much a rainbow of different possibilities, different spectrums of not just the one that we are given or the one that we can necessarily see. Hence the dark side of the moon, hence the dark moon, hence a new moon. And so what a strange occurrence. I wonder if I could see. Oh, I wonder if I could see what this person just said so that I can answer. But oh, there we go. Breath is a bridge to intuition. I've also been discerning between instinct and intuition. First posting about Arca in the context of making music. Curious, you have thoughts? Instinct is not intuition. This is a very interesting point, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Much like primal is not intuition. Like that's very much I think, a misdirect of the ways in which Western appropriations of healing modalities has bestowed upon us, but also very deeply our misunderstandings of consciousness. When people say they're feeling primal, they mean instinct, and that means giving in to impulse. Those terminologies are based on a hierarchical sense of understanding and consciousness. Those modalities are very much derived from a very speciesist hierarchy, in which case the ego discerns itself as prime apex predator. This is very much on the binary of predator and prey. And so to get out of that loop, to get out of that cycle, I think it's very important that we understand more about consciousness in capacity for much more than just us or what we think is consciousness. Quite honestly, I think a lot of us sure have our eyes open and are, breathing at the moment, but lack consciousness entirely, but at the same time point at other things and say that it is not conscious. However, in very indigenous or ancestral modalities or schools of thought or philosophies, the stones are conscious and hold stories, which is also now proven scientifically. The water has a capacity for consciousness, which has been something that is capable of not just a conduit of current and electricity, but of computing in and of itself and retaining information. There's people that are very much fighting for the rights of sea creatures, even of whales on their lands, because they do have a consciousness and they do impact the things around us. So impulse and instinct are much more similar than intuition. Impulse and instinct is like without consciousness. It is just automatic. It happens. And it's a way in which we excuse bad behavior. It's a way in which we excuse lack of growth. It's a way in which we excuse, oh, what's up? Good to see you. It's a way in which we excuse a lack of awareness of the self. When we say something is an impulse, it means that we lacked the conscious awareness to move against it. So we assimilated, or so we aligned with it, and some we let it drive instead of us. We aligned with it instead of aligning it to us. But prime consciousness, which is something that science is coming to understand as well, as we used to think that primal consciousness was like where you would find intuition because that's where alligators get angry or whatever. But what a faulty metric, because it is just a binary of pleasure and pain, and even that we have faulty understandings of. And it is not the only origination of those points either. It is just sort of like a siphoning point or a churning point, kind of like, again, like the ways in which medical sciences are beginning to understand organs of digestion, even like the appendix and its actual purpose, let alone other organs that assist in digestion of food, emotion, or thought as they process through the body, which is something that also generally the population doesn't practice. That digesting food or emotion or thought ought to take place. We really only just consume and gorge and then sleep it off. Meanwhile, the stress and the worry and the roast chicken is still digesting and rotting days and days later. But in science, something that has been regarded by particle physicists as zenith consciousness is below that, is more like brainstem than amygdala. It's more the synthesis of pleasure and pain than it is the impulse to react to pleasure and pain. And that is something that I regarded as collective consciousness, but that I also regard as prime consciousness. Not primal, but prime as in like the way prime numbers vibrate. The way that prime numbers can also be divided by themselves, by their own identity. And this is in a very deeply rooted molecular way, the ways in which a single cell in you has the power and the luminosity of thousands of galaxies, or a single drop of water in you has the electrical capacity to take down much more than you would think your physical body could. And that we do have a very high capacity for current in us, but the misuse of current is better misdirected when we only associate it between impulse and instinct and let it direct us from the amygdala rather than from the brainstem. This is also true of the ways in which so much sensory input can either deviate into the brain and into processing, or bypass those processes and go directly into the brainstem, which is why CIA and the government has done so much studying on the brain and sense of smell as far as memory goes, or sense of smell as far as stimulus goes. The ways in which marketing even will create this sort of sensory setting, or quite honestly, even your therapist's office will probably create, ideally, would hopefully create a sensory setting, because it begins to form a new reality around you. The ways in which we've understood consciousness thus far are still within the paradigm of somebody else's consciousness or somebody else's system of consciousness. But prime consciousness or zenith consciousness or collective consciousness, or something that I have also found regarded as cosmic consciousness by some very leading and also very slimy people. Very leading scientists and also very shady motherfuckers would regard it as cosmic consciousness. in which case you are beyond impulse and deeper than intuition. Or maybe as deep as intuition. I think intuition comes from prime consciousness, or from collective consciousness, or from the ether, from the web, from the etheric web around us, is like the main port. But much of the system has had us regress to impulse as intuition, or impulse as intellect, or permissive to these sort of impulses, and it really just placates and further roots into colonial systems where aggression toward that which is smaller or weaker than you is acceptable, and that is not acceptable in the collective consciousness, because I think a true collective consciousness in a very ancient and ancestral way is for the benefit of all sentience. And that is only found in the collective consciousness, not just in our entitlements or impulses. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but I think it probably gives you a whole new vocabulary in which to understand it. And with that, thank you to the homies that are here, and to the rest of the homies that will see it later. Let's integrate this with an elemental cleansing in the cycle of harmonies, and perhaps even a very clearing of the path that I saw before me in breathing with all of this, so that we can use our true desire, our true creative fire in the ways in which it was meant to, and not just distort it into impulse or instinct or whatever other sad excuses we have for consciousness or awareness. And so, if you have not done this with me before, it is an elemental cycle of harmonies and breathing, in which each element has a breath attached to it. We do each element and each breath 3 times, which takes us to a cycle of 12. However, if you've been around before, we know that 12 is mathematically an internal vortex. And so we find ourselves in that cycle, that dance of foxes, that blind, illusory dance, which is exactly what Western astrology was designed for, and what the occult withholds. And so, to expand into a more broad vortex of energy, like a fractal, we incorporate the 13th, in which case that would just be, we do fire, earth, air, water, and then we take a deep breath in, and we'll do like a sound, a sigh, a little throat thing, even if you want to, whatever feels appropriate at the time. Do not discriminate, let it out. You gotta let it move. And if you don't know what to do, then we can always do an Aum, which, if you have not read my Powers of Quality, Qualities of Power, there are quite a few research studies and science journals sourced in that document that explain how Aum meditation or recitation is particularly good for a mind caught in its own fire, or a mind in the throes in one way or another. So, when unsure, an Aum goes very far. With that, if you've never done an Aum with me, it will very much start from the root of your belly, expanding into the chest, horizontally before vertically, because we are toppling the hierarchies. And it is not all about mental growth. It is about a full integral body understanding, right? I like to think of it like like how ultrasonics will vibrate all of the bullshit off, and sort of vibrates us much like a somatic or cymatic tray, cymatic experiment, vibrates all of the particles into a central line where they need to be after having cleansed the elements. So, With that being said, do me a favor and just follow along, yeah? Sip the air in through your mouth, feeling the coolness against the heat of your flesh. And exhale through the nose, feeling the level of focus required to direct that intention. Inhaling through the mouth, feeling the chest and space between the shoulder blades open. And exhaling through the nose, feeling that heat and that breath rise behind the eyes. Inhale through the mouth, sipping in the coolness of the air, and exhaling through the nose, feeling that breath laser and center and rise. Inhale through the nose, feeling the throat and the palate open, and exhaling through the nose, feeling that breath now descend into the body, into the thighs. Inhale through the nose, feeling the chest and the central channel open and accept the breath. And exhale through the nose, feeling that breath descend, dropping the shoulders and holding it in the space between your hips. Inhaling through the nose, feeling that central channel open, widen. And exhale through the nose, feeling that breath descend into the body, filling it like a hand into a glove. Sipping the air through the mouth again, inhale. Feeling the coolness of the air sweep across the skull. And draw the tongue out, exhale. Feeling the diaphragm rise into you to meet this breath. Inhale through the mouth. Feeling that cool air sweep the warmth across your skull and spine. And draw the tongue out. Exhale, bridging the breath with the diaphragm, carrying that breath to heart. Inhale through the mouth. Clearing dust out of the mind, like off of a shelf, and drawing the tongue out. Feeling the mind space and the gut space bridge and reach toward each other in coherence and collaboration. Inhale through the nose now. Feeling all of the space made, accepting the breath, and gently, patiently, like whistling through the lips, we exhale. Letting any tension that remains go with it. Inhale through the nose. Feeling the openness and receptivity of the body to the breath. And exhaling through the mouth, gently and patiently. Like clearing a path of energy in you and beyond you. Inhaling through the nose. Filling the body in every corner with breath. And gently, patiently exhaling through the lips. Like a soft sigh or whisper on the wind. And as you drag that exhale out as long as possible, and when you've reached your very last drop. We carry the breath back in through the nose so that we may release any sound, any vibration that feels coherent with the body as it is. And may you see a clearer path before you and within you for having sat with and cleansed every element and brought coherence to each checkpoint in the body, to your mind, to your heart, to your gut and intuition, and to your root and thought and presence and in awareness. I hope that you are feeling well. I hope that you are feeling the impact of that. May it serve you in deep rest or in deep focus, however it is you choose to direct your fire. And so with that, I will leave you to integrate, to bask, maybe even breathe a little bit more, because you can take this with you anywhere you go. But most, I appreciate you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much for your support and for your curiosity, not just toward what I do, but toward yourself, ultimately, because that is what I do. I incite curiosity into the depths of you so that we may change and excavate and rebuild from the depths around us. Atanto, Questa, thank you from my heart. I appreciate you very much. And to you, many blessings. And ultimately, I will see you again sooner than later. And until next time.